At the last online PLC meeting, I was asked to put together a presentation and share with you what I've learned about using technology to enhance student learning through the various formats of online learning. The information that I share with you today comes from a wide variety of resources, including the information and thoughts that I gathered at the iNACOL conference in New Orleans this past October, the World Wide Web, 3 books that I have read over the course of the year. The first one called Essentials of Online Course Design, a Standards-Based Guide by Marjorie and Kristen. And I'm going to let you best decide how to butcher their last names because I don't want to do that for you. Flip Your Classroom by Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams, and Conquering the Content by Robin M. Smith. As a member of this group, my goals are, number one, to continue to be a student myself and to continue my own professional development while serving you as best I can. I know that your main focus is to be in the classroom and to prepare your lessons for your students, and you don't have necessarily the time to be researching online learning. So if I can help to do that for you and bring that information back to you, then I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to share that information with you to help determine what type of information is most conducive, but I don't want to say that this is the most conducive. I hope that the information that I bring back to the group helps to spur on exciting conversation and conversation that will help us to develop course materials that provide opportunities for active and engaged student learning, while at the same time avoiding frustrations and pitfalls that are associated with teaching in an online environment. Throughout this process, I've had one resonating thought that I think is a key concept that people really need to keep in mind as they step forward into thinking about creating either an online course, a blended course, or a flipped classroom. And that is that teaching in an online environment is not the same as teaching within a traditional classroom. You can't just take what you do in the traditional classroom, upload it to the web, and think that it's going to be conducive or beneficial to students' learning. This was one of the slides that was presented at the iNACOL conference that I attended, and it just uses a Venn diagram to take a look at traditional versus blended teaching practices, and the practices that are obviously going to be the same no matter where you're at, and practices that are going to need to be enhanced versus practices that are going to be completely new if you are blending your classroom. At the meeting, I talked about different types of online learning, so I'm going to very quickly talk about that again in case you don't know the difference. Online classes are classes that are taught completely online, where there is no face-to-face time between the teacher and student or students together. Blended classrooms actually combine face-to-face time with the teacher and students, and there's an online component as well. A synchronous flipped classroom takes learning and flips the instructional and the homework piece, but it does it so that everybody is doing the same thing at the same time. The instructional information is delivered at home, and the homework, project-based learning, problem solving, critical thinking, all of that becomes the focus of class time. Versus an asynchronous flipped classroom, or what we call the mastery approach, is slightly different. The instructional information is still delivered typically outside of class. However, students work through the curriculum completely at their own pace. They advocate for themselves. The teacher differentiates instruction to meet their needs at various times throughout the course, but the student has to demonstrate mastery of a concept before they are allowed to move on to the next concept within the curriculum. As I was researching web-based learning environments, there were 4 distinct phases of learning that made online learning more effective, and I've got them listed for you right there. You need to activate prior experience. Learners need to be able to somehow demonstrate their skills, apply those skills, and integrate them into the real world. Active and engaging online courses need to be clearly and attractively presented. They need to have a variety of different modes. Students need to not just sit there, listen, watch, and read what's going on, but they need to have hands-on activities. They need to be doing things. The information needs to be meaningful and authentic. The learners need to be engaged in solving real-world problems and take their existing knowledge and use it as a foundation for what they are learning. The more collaborative the course is, allowing contact with other students, having the teacher accessible throughout the entire course, the more successful the course is going to be. New knowledge needs to be demonstrated to the learner. The learners need to be able to apply the new knowledge. They need to be able to integrate it again into their world. And they also need to be able to reflect upon it and assess where they are in their own learning process. Some of the big ideas that I think need to be thought about before diving into creating courses that leverage technology include this acronym that I kind of threw together, and that was CPR for you. It will help you survive. The C stands for chunkability, which I'll talk about on the next slide because that's a huge concept. The P stands for pausability. In today's society, people are running in all different directions and their schedules are extremely busy. They need to have the ability to stop what they're doing and come back to it at a later time. And so that chunkability piece is going to come into this pausability. R stands for repeatability. In essence, they need to be able to complete the chunk, which we'll talk about next, as many times as they'd like. And research shows that their likelihood of doing this is going to decrease with every 7 minutes of increments. So if your chunk is 7 minutes long, they're extremely likely to complete it. If it's 14 minutes long, they're likely to complete it. If it's 21 minutes long, they become less likely to do it. If it's 28 minutes long, you're more than likely not going to have them complete that chunk. So you want your chunks to be nice and short, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. And U stands for understandability, and basically that really refers to the logistics of the lesson and a student's ability to follow through with the lesson. Where do I go? What do I do? What do I turn in? Where do I turn it in? When's it due? And that sort of thing. So here's the biggie, the chunkability, something that we as teachers often have a hard time doing because sometimes we stand in the front of the classroom and we lecture to our students for 20, 30 minutes at a time. And that goes completely against an online learning environment. So what they like to do is they like to take the entire course and break it up into 10 to 25 main topics, and a lot of textbooks or resources that I looked at will refer to those as modules. We call them units maybe. Each module then is divided into 5 to 7 competencies or outcomes, which is known as a session, and then each competency or outcome is supported by 5 to 9 major points. Each one of those major points is a chunk, and it's best to present those chunks in 5 to 9 minutes of passive learning, followed by opportunities to engage actively in that learning. And when you do the math, if a module is divided into 7 competencies and you do the maximum of 9 supporting chunks, a student can end up learning 63 big concepts within that one unit. So it's really important that you determine what are the most important competencies, outcomes that you really want the students to be able to walk away with. Some of the questions that you might have is, where does this information belong? If I'm teaching in the traditional classroom and I have stuff online, where should I put it? Should I keep it in my classroom? Should I put it online? The answer to that question is really leave your integrative learning for the classroom. If it's something that's collaborative, put it there. If it's just transferring knowledge, put it in your online portion of the class. It's important to get organized before you tackle this process, and you want to think about the future because our curriculum is constantly changing. We see that all the time, so it's important to be prepared. Some of the big tips that I came across is number 1, all of your content needs to be named in a fashion that is logical and retrievable. The resources that I read suggested naming everything based on the modules. They also suggest never ever putting any textbook chapter numbers or page references within the content, because then you would have to update and edit that in multiple places. You only want that information to appear in one place, and we'll talk about where that is little bit later. So in order to easily update your course at any time, again, they always talk about creating that content in very short segments, or that chunkability. That way you can delete something that is no longer current and replace it easily with something that is. You can also insert new information in any location whenever you want to.